Right. Okay. Thank you, everybody. And I'm going to talk to you about finding my great-grandfather. Some of you may have seen some elements of this before because I have used this mystery as an example in quite a few of my presentations before. So Thelma Griffin was my grandmother, my paternal grandmother, who was born in 1904 in Adelaide. She was illegitimate. She had one sister, Minnie, who was also believed to have had a different father, and they were both brought up by an aunt. They didn't live with their mother. Thelma only had two children, my father and Jill, and I'm an only child, and Jill had no children. So my DNA is the only DNA that I've got to work with to solve this mystery, and I never thought that I would be able to work out who her father was. And when you think about it, it's 3 to 4 generations back that I need to find, so it's not a close matches that are going to help me. And I've only got 50% of my father's DNA, so therefore 25% of Thelma's, and then only 12.5 for her father. So it's not much to work with, really. Thelma's birth records of father was not stated on the certificate. It was all it says is her mother was Edith Elizabeth Griffin. Similar to others that have spoken before, I first tested at Family Tree DNA back in 2010, and I'd been tested for about 5 years, and I hadn't really had any matches of any significance until I tested at Ancestry, and I had these fourth cousin matches that had turned up that I didn't really know where they fitted in, and I did think that they were probably related on this line, but a lot of them had no family trees, and didn't reply, as is the case for many people, and I wasn't getting anywhere. But then one day I noticed this match with this Jenny, who I shared 64 centimorgans with across 4 segments. And when I studied her tree, I realized she had South Australian ancestors. And I started to search on all the names of the surnames in her tree, and I managed to find other matches buried down in my more distant matches that were actually had some of the same names in it. So I sort of researched all these surnames to see what sort of families, whether it all led me to one family. And it basically led me to 2 families, Johann Wedding and Maria Heinrich, and Johann Knoll and Maria Teltow. But the matches were not really that big. Most of the people didn't have trees, and so it wasn't very conclusive. I did sort of get at this point thinking that perhaps there were 2 main contenders, a fellow by the name of Herman Wedding and his brother Theodore Wedding, aged 21 and 15. They were living near Hamley Bridge in 1903, where Thelma's family did have some associations there, but it was a bit of a stretch. And when I looked at the amount of DNA that was being shared by the various people, it didn't really fit. So I was never very happy with the fact that these 2 families might be, these 2 people, Herman and Theodore, might be my great-grandfather. But then someone told me about this book called The Knoll Family History, and it was a miracle that I found that I went to the SAG library and found these family histories. And there's one for the Knoll family, the Walling family, and the Weeding family. And lo and behold, all of my DNA matches, because these were written in the 70s, when privacy wasn't such an issue, they were published in the 70s, and they had children in there that had been born in the 70s. So there was a lot of my DNA matches were actually in the book under the names that they registered at Ancestry. So it was wonderful, and I spent many months going through these books and searching out the pedigrees of all my DNA matches, and I ended up with this. I tried to put it into some sort of, that to me was some sort of order. But as you can see, there's a lot of information there. We didn't have some of the tools that we have today back in 2017. So as you can see, there was a lot of cross-pollination, if you like, some families marrying other families, and all these Prussian families tended to marry very closely. So it was a bit of a mess, and I still wasn't quite sure where I fitted. But as I did a lot of work on all of those people, and I finally decided, because I had a lot of these Knoll matches, that I really must be connected to either one of these two couples, Johann Frederick Wedding and Joanna Elizabeth Knoll, and they are the parents of Theodore and Herman, or this other family emerged, Johann Frederick William Knoll and Maria Elizabeth Walling. And they had three sons that were in contention: Henry, Bill, and Otto. Um, Back then, I tried to map all my DNA matches. We didn't have DNA painter back then, and I used color coding to try and match people into my tree. So all of these colors in the yellow, the blue, the purple, etc., are DNA matches, and where their matches take me back to. So I could see that most people were converging on the Wedding Heinrich couple, and the Knoll Telltale. So as far as, and Jenny is descended from the Wedding Knoll couple. So am I descended from Wedding Knoll, or am I a double cousin on both those lines with Jenny? It wasn't clear. Jenny did actually share 4 segments with me, 68 centimorgans, but over 4 segments. So she could be a double cousin, so related on 2 different sides of her family. Another large match I had was Lucille, and similarly, she was descended from the Noel Walling couple. Same issue as Jenny. When I mapped all the DNA matches, they come out on Knoll Telltale and Wedding Heinrich. So am I related closely to Wall Knowling, or am I a double cousin to Lucille? Hard to work out. And Lucille's match was only something like, she was my 4th closest match in total, but she was still only about 24 centimorgans, and she's younger than I am, so she's more distant from the suspect as well. So I re-looked at the possibilities and did a lot more research, and the Wedding family, they lived in Hamley Bridge, as I said. Theodore, I really didn't think he could be the father of Thelma, basically because of the matches that I had with Jenny, that the shared centimorgans should be much higher if Theodore was the father. And the same with Herman, and he was only 15, and the shared centimorgans didn't look right, so probably unlikely. But they were still a possibility, because stranger things have happened, and as we mentioned, we weren't dealing with very large numbers in our matches. The other family was the Knoll family. Now, the Knoll family, once I started looking into them, became much more of interest, because they lived in the same suburb as Edith. Henry, Fred, who's also known as Bill, and Otto. Now, I had been thinking that Henry wouldn't be in contention, mainly be due to the match that I had with Lucille, which, because she was descended down that line. Similar to Jenny, she didn't have a very big match. But once again, she's several generations down away from the common ancestors, so that's not surprising. Fred was still in contention, and the wonderful information that was in the Knoll family history told me that he was having troubles with his wife at the time. She was pregnant at the time that Thelma would have been conceived, and they only lived around the corner, about 2 minutes walk away. So possible infidelity there, perhaps. Now, Otto's probably, the most likely, given that he was 21 and single at the time. The other thing that made me look at this family was that they had a younger sister, Louisa, who was roughly the same age as Edith and had the same occupation. So perhaps they worked or went to school together, and that's how the two families knew each other. Again, it was only just around the corner, so highly likely they frequented in the same circles. Why won't this go? Right. So these wonderful photos were in the books in the library at SAG, and At that time, I was carrying this around with me everywhere I went and taking straw polls on what people thought who was my great grandfather. My mother wanted Otto because she thought he would look better in the family portraits. But I think there's similarities between all of them with me and my father and Thelma. So the Knoll Walling family became my primary focus. Johann Wilhelm Knoll emigrated to South Australia with his father, Johann Frederick Knoll, in 1863. And Maria Walling, she came to South Australia with her parents aboard the Leontine in 1850. So they'd been in South Australia quite a long time. So could I be 12.5% Prussian? Well, looking at my ethnicity results in family tree DNA, there's West and Central Europe there of 33%. I don't know of any German or French ancestry yet, so that was looking like it could fit there. But 23andMe was the most interesting one, I thought, in that it shows you some your ancestry timeline, and it's got French and German kicking in there somewhere in that period of 1840 to 1850, and that's spot on if I'm right about the Knoll couple. So I then went looking for descendants to target tests, and I have lots and lots of matches on both sides of the Knoll and Walling families. So I was pretty happy that I was on the right track. So I finally found, through writing to everybody on Ancestry who had any of these people in their tree, someone who was the grandson of Otto, BJ, and who agreed to test for me. And so if my unknown grandfather was Fred or Henry, I'd be a second cousin once removed to BJ. But if Otto was my great-grandfather and BJ's grandfather, we would be half first cousin once removed. As luck would have it, when the results came out, he shared a great big match with me, which was very pleasing, of 164 centimorgans over 7 segments. However, the amount in terms of the averages for relationships was slap bang in the middle of both of those ranges. So it should have been 226, around about 226 if he was a half first cousin once removed and it was Otto, or somewhere around 123. So it's slightly higher than Henry or Bill's average, but not quite as high as Otto. So I'm still leaning towards Otto, but I don't think it's conclusive. So the next thing I did was upload to GEDmatch, and it was wonderful then, because at GEDmatch I can look at the 23rd chromosome, chromosome X, which is not included in your results. It's tested but not included in your results at Ancestry DNA, and that revealed that I had a 73.6 centimorgan match on the X chromosome with BJ. So that's quite a good size match. And the X chromosome has special inheritance paths, so that was able to give me more information to work with. So in terms of my X chromosome inheritance path, because I inherit this, we're talking about my father's side, I inherit my X chromosome from my father. Because he's a male, he only gets it from his mother, so it's got none of his father's side in it. So it's definitely on Thelma's line, the X chromosome match. And if you look there in terms of where he would get it, because he's a male, he would only get it from his mother. So it narrows the possibilities of matching down. So it looks as if I probably inherited that X perhaps through Maria Elizabeth Walling. When I looked at BJ, you can compare his X inheritance path to my X inheritance path. We both have Maria Elizabeth Walling in there, and he's not getting his X chromosome from that Knoll side. But the only problem with this is that all 3 Knoll brothers would have received their X from their mother. So this chart could equally apply for any descendant of Henry and Fred as well that had a similar inheritance trail to them. So we've got a likely Walling connection, but it's impossible to be certain about which brother it is still. But what about Theodore and Herman? when you look at their X chromosome, Theodore and Herman, they inherit it through the Zimmerman line and not the Knoll line. And BJ, he's got Zimmerman there in his tree, but he's not getting his X chromosome from the Zimmerman side. So the match is still likely to be on this side, the whirling side. And in fact, I got a third match quite a way down the track with a person by the name of SM, and the X match triangulates and goes back further generation. So we know now definitely that the X match is probably coming from, well, definitely coming from the whirling wedding couple down through Maria Walling. Now, I then had to look at all the descendants of Andreas Walling and Maria Dorothea Wedding, who are the parents of Maria Walling, just to ensure that I had actually researched everybody that could possibly be in contention. And Andreas and Dorothea had 8 children, and their 8 children some of them had 14 children each. So it was a big exercise to trace all their descendants down into the present day, or not to the likely date that Thelma was conceived. But most of the male children who were in the likely time frame had no Knoll connections, so they seemed less likely than the other couples that I had identified. But I needed to check the shared matches and triangulated groups to make sure that things were consistent with the theory. Otherwise, I might need to go back another generation, because the X chromosome can actually stay intact quite sizably for many generations on the male side. But so many of our current tools were not yet developed, so I had to do a lot of manual calculations, and I'm just going to show you some of the things I had to do. I'm not going to explain the tool or tell you how long it took me, but I'll just quickly run through. So this is the McGuire method, and this is a method that I used, the Excel spreadsheet. It was actually about 3 times as long as what you can see, to map relationships and show how different people are related to each other. And the color coding there, the red, the amber, and the green, was me trying to say, well, were those matches within the right time frame, in the right probabilities for that particular relationship, whether it was unlikely or possible, or, you know, green would obviously is definitely within the realm. Enchanting Companion, which is a add-on to Family Tree Maker, brought out this very nice automated McGuire method later, and it was much easier to do and looks much more professional, but you need to add in DNA facts to Family Tree Maker, and the beauty about that is that they're there for next time you want to do a calculation and you don't have to retype everything. So that is good. So, but it still didn't tell me anything new. I still had relationships that looked too high, too low, or in between. So it was very difficult. And the other thing is that because of the double relationships, I had to do these for both sides, so of the tree, looking at both those ancestors that went back on both sides. And a similar thing for DNA Painter, that came in about 2000. Well, DNA Painter came in a bit earlier than this, but Watto didn't come in until about August 2019. So then I tried to do the same thing, mapping all my matches in there to see what Watto would tell me. We were mapping back to as far back as the generations where I had matches, which we now know is probably not the best way to do it. But neither tool was able to consider the double relationships, and I had to do two charts for each side of the family and then make my own conclusions about what both of those did. So it's complex and time consuming, but interesting, and DNA Painter is a very good way to look at that, particularly when you've got as many matches as I had. And there's a lot more matches now. The Enchanting Companion brought out this simulation tool, and it's a very interesting tool, whereas it uses the information from the matrix that we just spoke about and uses the shared segment data to project where you might fit into the tree. But beware, it's not always right. This is a chart that shows where it thought I should be. I expected to be in the Knoll area there in the middle, but it placed me over with the Walling Schmall line. Now, because of that extra X match that I had that took me back to the Walling wedding couple, back another generation, I know that I have to be descended from that couple somehow, and because of the X match. I don't have any of these Schmall segments at all, no matches to any of those, and I have lots of matches to the Walling Knoll couple. So both DNA Painter and the Charting Companion simulation work best when you narrow it down to exclude the more distant relationships and just focus on the more the close ones. And so I did a simulation from Maria Walling and J.A. Knoll, the parents of my 3 likely brothers. It put me here with my great-grandfather being predicted as Bill, or Fred, as he was really called. That was our least favourite option. But DNA Painter, I put the information into DNA Painter down at this level from Maria Walling, and to see what it says about who is my great-grandfather. Now, DNA Painter suggests an equal score for all 3 and puts it down as 1 for each. So each are possible. So I still am not in a position to be able to say, I don't believe which one is my great-grandfather. But I have got sufficient evidence and information to prove, I believe, that I have verified DNA matches, and I have lots of triangulated groups that confirm many, many, many segments further back in my tree to going back 1, 2, 3, at least 3 generations back from my male Knoll. So I'm satisfied to say that I am related to the Knoll family, but I'm very confident that Johann Friedrich Knoll and Maria Walling are Thelma's grandparents. And as I said, I have many matches that confirm and fit into this hypothetical tree. Thing I would say is that make sure that you consider all possibilities if you're looking at anything like this, and be wary of predictive tools, as we've seen in what I've shown today. Some of them don't necessarily give you the right answer. I probably will never be able to split between the 3 brothers. I'm still aiming to target test more descendants, and I constantly write to people where I find anyone who has them in their tree. It's obviously something that I have to be satisfied that I may never know. The good news, last year, oh, it was only not last year, 2020 seems like a blur. In 2019, I had the luck to go to Tuckheim in Germany, which is an area was formerly part of Prussia, where my family, Noel Walling family, came from. And there's lots of evidence of Walling still living in Tuckheim. I was actually in the library at Genthen, and I was introduced to Ankie Walling. Now, I don't know whether the librarian rustled her up after I'd been making inquiries about the Walling family, but she sort of miraculously appeared and invited me out to her family home to meet her family. And here I am with Sarah, Stephen, Helga and Ankie out at Tuckheim. And we had a lovely afternoon eating German cream cakes and trying to speak to each other through Google Translate. Sarah was happily keying things in and telling me what everyone was saying. While I was there, I was fortunate enough that Helga gave me a family history of the Whirling family, and but it was all in German, which was a bit of a worry. But it did have the photo of Johann Andreas Walling in it. And so they were of the opinion that they are descended from this couple as well, which were in my family tree, and the couple that came to South Australia in 1850. I tried to research what they had given me when I came home, and I think there's an error in their tree. We're missing a generation or two, but it was very interesting to see my ancestors in their tree. It was one thing I could read, having no German. So that was very exciting. So I've written about this in my blog if you're interested in reading any more about it. And just in case you were wondering, I am also related now to Shannon Knoll, actually a fifth cousin. He's, for those of you probably saying who, Australian Idol runner-up in 2003. And he's been up to some scurrilous things, so I don't think it's a great claim to fame, but I just thought I'd mention it. So that's all I wanted to say, and thank you for listening to me. Thank you.